Welcome to our last week of CRJ 303. Can you believe we are 1 week away from finishing this class? This week we will discuss the differences among and purposes behind reentry programs such as parole, supervised parole, and mandatory release. We will also examine concerns with the future of corrections. And lastly, we will articulate arguments for and against privatization of prisons. In Chapter 9, we will be discussing parole and post-prison conditional release. So what is parole? According to the textbook, Walker explains that parole, which has a history somewhat similar to that of probation, became established in practice because of the conceptual foundations served to achieve a number of purposes. These purposes included additional avenues for criminal justice officials to practice discretionary leniency and individualized justice, to present an option that could be understood as both less expensive and more convenient than incarceration, and to present a strategy for dealing with overcrowding. Historians generally credit the foundational rubric for the practice of parole to the development of the mark system by Alexander McConaughey during the 1800s in the British penal colony on Norfolk Island near Australia. McConaughey experimented with what is known today as indeterminate sentencing. McConaughey assigned a number of marks or points to each sentence. Under this arrangement, the convict could progress through several grades and in due course earn a ticket to leave conditional release. According to the Florida Commission on Offender Review, conditional release requires mandatory post-prison supervision for inmates who are sentenced for certain violent crimes and who have served a prior felony commitment at a state or federal correctional institution, or who are sentenced as a habitual offender, violent career criminal, or court-designated sexual predator. Unlike parole, conditional release is not a discretionary release. Upon release from prison, inmates who are subject to conditional release are supervised for a period of time equal to the gain time that they received in prison. These offenders are subject to strict conditions of supervision set by the Commission, and this supervision can be revoked and the releasee returned to prison if the Commission determines that it willfully and substantially violation of supervision has occurred. One way to cut costs is they are adopting a data and evidence-based methods that involve software programs to calculate an inmate's odds of recidivism. Officials accustomed to relying heavily on experience and intuition when making parole rulings are now must take computerized inmate assessments and personality assessments into account. Automated assessments based on the inmate interviews and other data, such as age at the first time of arrest, may predict future crime and make release decisions more objective. After reading how some states assess a person being released from prison, does relying on a software program seem reliable? What could be some pros and cons of using a software program to determine someone's life? There are three types of release: discretionary, mandatory, and term of supervised release. Discretionary release is when an offender has gone through the action of a parole board. This form of conditional release we usually think of in connection with the term parole. A person sentenced to prison applies to the parole board, which can decide to allow conditional release or not. Mandatory release is when there is no parole board or action for those offenders, but they have been placed under supervision in a community as a matter of legislation. As a matter of law, their sentences to prison include a term of community supervision to follow incarceration in prison. Lastly, the term of supervised release means that the law authorizes the sentencing judge to impose both a term of incarceration and a term on supervision in the community to follow. When that has happened, the judge has determined the length of both terms within parameters set by the law. There will always be some challenges of reentry. These include how to protect society, how to foster an individual's transition from life in prison to life as a productive citizen. Some of these challenges of reentry include safety to the public, fostering an individual's transition life, housing, employment, triggers, support network, and transportation. Revocation is defined as the administrative act of committing a parolee back to prison for his or her failure to comply with the conditions of parole. Basically, this means if an offender violated a condition of their release. When a parolee is arrested, they are afforded a hearing. The hearing determines if there is probable cause to believe the parolee violated a parole condition. For the hearing, the parolee may attain counsel to represent him. After the hearing, the board decides by majority vote whether to continue or revoke parole. In Chapter 10, we will be discussing emerging themes in corrections. There are many issues facing corrections: overcrowding, budgets, and privatization. In the United States, the government took sole responsibility for prisons and jails until wardens began leasing out convicts for work and housing assignments with private business people in the early 19th century. This practice was largely swept away by reform movements in the wake of scandals, but privately operated facilities continue to survive in low security and community-based facilities and juvenile correctional systems. Then we had the creation of private prisons. According to Carlson and Simon, the emergence of the private imprisonment industry was the result of several factors. Demand for prison and jail beds, state and local governments were slapped with expenditure caps, public debt ceilings were being reached, voters were declining to approve increases in public debt for prison and jail construction. According to Carlson and Simon, the District of Columbia sold its correctional treatment facility to the Corrections Corporation of America for $59 million, and the firm will operate for the district on a 20-year leaseback arrangement. Corrections Corporation of America founded the private corrections management industry 3 decades ago, establishing industry standards for future-focused, forward-thinking correctional solutions. A commitment to innovation, efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and achievement has made the company the private corrections management provider of choice for federal, state, and local agencies since 1983. Corrections Corporation of America announced that it's rebranding its corporation enterprise as Core Civic. Under the Core Civic brand, the company will provide 3 distinct business offerings: Core Civic Safety, a national leader in high-quality corrections and detention management; Core Civic Properties, offering a wide range of innovative, cost-saving government real estate solutions; and Core Civic Community, a growing network of residential reentry centers to help tackle America's recidivism crisis. There are some advantages and disadvantages of private prisons. Some advantages include help saving the government time, effort, and money. They can keep prison population at the right level, and they can create jobs. Some disadvantages include not being as cost-effective as originally thought, may not be safe and secure, since they tend to hire less experienced officers, and they encourage corruption and injustice. The Department of Justice ordered the Bureau of Prisons to begin phasing out the use of private prisons. Private prisons are inhumane profit machines where the bottom line is often more important than the people's lives. According to the Sentencing Project, between 1980 and 2014, the number of incarcerated women increased by more than 700%. In 2014, there were roughly 966,000 women on probation, 106,000 in prison, and 109,000 in jail, and 102,000 on parole. 24% of female prisoners have been convicted of a drug offense, compared to 15% of the male prisoners. 28% of incarcerated women have been convicted of a property crime, compared to 19% among incarcerated men. Over the past quarter century, there has been a profound change in the involvement of women within the criminal justice system. This is the result of more expansive law enforcement efforts, stricter drug sentencing laws, and post-conviction barriers to reentry that uniquely affect women. In 2014, the imprisonment rate for African American women was more than twice the rate of imprisonment for white women. Reentry barriers for women include the following: reestablishing a home and family life, regaining legal and physical custody of children, finding affordable housing, securing employment, creating a new social network, fulfilling on the multiple conditions of parole plan, including continued sobriety. Death penalty is a punishment given by court of law. Some offenses that are punished by death include murder, treason, terrorism, espionage, attempting to kill a witness, and rape of a child under 13. There has been 1,448 executions since 1976. As of July 2016, California has 741 death row inmates, followed by Florida at 396. The total inmates on death row is 2,905. Since 1976, Texas has executed 540, followed by Oklahoma, which has executed 112. As of December 2014, there are 56 women on death row. Since 1976, 16 women have been executed. So what's the race of executions? 56% is white, 34% is black, 8% is Hispanic, and 2% is other. Defense costs for death penalty trials in Kansas averaged about $400,000 per case compared to $100,000 per case when the death penalty was not sought. So do you support the death penalty? As of 2010, the majority of voters, 61%, would choose a punishment other than the death penalty for murder. Are times changing? Are we seeing more of a shift in the way we handle death cases? Since we're discussing the death penalty this week, I thought we could discuss the case of Teresa Lewis. Little background on her case, and she was found guilty in 2003 of her role in having her husband and stepson killed for money. She was called the head of the serpent. The plot also involved two gunmen who agreed to sex and cash in exchange for murder. She was sentenced to death. She was ultimately put to death by lethal injection in 2010. So what made her case different? She would be the first woman to die by the death penalty since 1912. Her intelligence test showed that her IQ was 72, which made her borderline intellectually disabled, and she suffered from dependent personality disorder and other addictions. Plus, she never had a single episode of violent behavior in the past. She also lacked basic skills necessary to organize a conspiracy to commit murder for hire. Even author John Grisham stood behind Teresa to help reduce her sentence. He could not understand why she was on death row when she didn't pull the trigger. In your opinion, should Teresa Lewis have been executed? If not, what would have been the appropriate punishment for Teresa? I hope you have enjoyed our time together in this class. In this class, we discussed a number of issues that pertain to corrections. As you move forward, continue to think about corrections, how it's changing, and are we moving in the right direction? If you have any questions this week, please let me know, and let's finish strong.